The sky was cloudy, and the wind was gentle. In the middle of the city, a large group of people stood holding signs. Some signs said, "We want justice." Others read, "Treat us like humans." It was a peaceful protest. People were calm. They chanted, walked slowly, and stood together in silence. Among the crowd was a man named Mr. Harold, a retired schoolteacher. He was 77 years old, with white hair and tired eyes. He walked slowly with the help of a wooden cane. His hands shook slightly, but his grip on a small cardboard sign was firm. His sign read, "Respect matters." Mr. Harold had come alone. He didn't know many people in the protest, but he believed in the message. He had spent his whole life teaching children to be kind, to respect others, and to speak up when something was wrong. Today, he was doing just that. As he reached the center of the protest, a few young people noticed him. "Sir, do you need help?" one young woman asked kindly. Mr. Harold smiled. "No, dear. I may be slow, but I can still stand." The crowd continued chanting softly, "Justice now, justice now." But not far away, a group of police officers stood in a line. Their faces were serious. Some looked angry. They started shouting, telling people to move back. The peaceful crowd tried to stay calm, but the officers were getting louder. Suddenly, the officers began pushing people. Back up now," one of them yelled. The young woman who spoke to Mr. Harold was pushed aside. People started stumbling. The peaceful mood was changing. Fear was growing. Mr. Harold tried to step back, but he moved too slowly. "Sir, move back," an officer shouted, pointing at him. Mr. Harold looked confused. He didn't understand why the police were so aggressive. He was just holding a sign, standing quietly. "I'm trying," he said softly. But the officer didn't wait. With one strong push, the officer shoved Mr. Harold in the chest. The old man lost his balance. His cane fell from his hand. He stumbled backward. Then he hit the ground hard. A loud gasp came from the crowd. People screamed. Mr. Harold's head hit the pavement. Blood slowly ran down his forehead. His sign landed beside him, crushed and dirty. The officer who pushed him took a step back, looking shocked, but he didn't help. People ran toward Mr. Harold. Some took out their phones, others yelled at the police. "Why did you push him? He's an old man. He wasn't doing anything." But the officer stayed silent. Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up near the protest. It stopped at the edge of the street. The back door opened slowly. A tall man in a black coat stepped out. He wore sunglasses. His face was calm, but his eyes were full of fire. It was Morgan Freeman. Some people recognized him immediately. "It's him. It's Morgan Freeman." But he didn't speak. He walked slowly toward the crowd, looking straight at Mr. Harold on the ground. The police moved aside without a word. Morgan knelt down beside Mr. Harold. He took off his coat and gently placed it under the old man's head. "Someone, call an ambulance," Morgan said softly. His voice was calm, but it held power. One officer finally called for help. Mr. Harold opened his eyes slightly. His lips moved. "Morgan. Freeman," he whispered. Morgan smiled gently. "I'm here, Harold." A reporter nearby whispered to her cameraman. "Do they know each other?" No one knew. Not yet. But Morgan Freeman's face had changed. He looked heartbroken, angry, determined. He looked up at the officer who pushed Harold and said only 5 words. "You just made a big mistake." The cameras captured everything. The fall, the blood, the actor's cold stare. And now the world was about to know the full story. But what was the connection between this old teacher and the world-famous actor? Why was Morgan Freeman there? And what would he do next? The answer would shake the city and beyond. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The flashing red lights cut through the tension in the air. Paramedics rushed to Mr. Harold, lifting him carefully onto a stretcher. His forehead was still bleeding, and his eyes were closed again. Morgan Freeman stood beside him, not saying a word. The protest had gone quiet. The crowd watched in shock. The police officers stood back, unsure what to do now. Morgan looked at the young woman who had helped Mr. Harold earlier. "Ride with him," he said gently. He needs someone he knows. She nodded quickly and followed the stretcher into the ambulance. As the doors closed, Morgan turned back to the crowd and the cameras. His voice was calm but firm. "This man," he said, pointing at the officer who pushed Harold, "is a retired school teacher. He taught children for over 40 years. He helped build this country's future." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "He stood here today, not to fight, not to shout, but just to be heard. And what did you do? You knocked him down. You tried to silence him. But let me make one thing clear." He removed his sunglasses, revealing tearful eyes. "You cannot silence a good man." The crowd began to cheer. Some cried, others clapped. The officer who had pushed Mr. Harold lowered his head, avoiding the camera. Morgan looked at him again. "You didn't know who he was, but I did." Now the crowd went silent again. People leaned forward. A reporter stepped forward and asked, "Mr. Freeman, do you know him personally?" Morgan nodded. "Yes, I do." He took a deep breath. "Many years ago, when I was just a scared boy trying to find my way, Mr. Harold was my teacher. He was the first man who told me I had a voice, that I was more than just a kid from the poor side of town." The crowd gasped. "He was the one who stayed after school to help me read better. He bought me books when I couldn't afford them. He told me stories that made me believe I could do something with my life." Morgan looked away for a second, wiping his eyes. "I became an actor. I made it out. But I never forgot the man who helped me." Now his voice grew stronger. "And today, I watched that same man get thrown to the ground like trash. I will not stay silent." People were crying. Reporters were writing fast. The moment was powerful. Morgan looked at the police chief who had just arrived. "This officer," he said, pointing again, "needs to be suspended immediately. An investigation must begin now." The police chief, embarrassed and cornered by cameras, nodded slowly. "We'll handle it," he said quietly. Morgan shook his head. "No, I'll handle it." He turned to the crowd once more. "Go home safely today. But don't forget what you saw. Justice isn't a word, it's an action." As the crowd slowly began to leave, Morgan walked to his car. Inside, he sat alone for a moment, staring at the dashboard. His assistant leaned in from the front seat. "Sir, are you okay?" Morgan nodded slowly. "I owe that man everything," he said. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Get me every lawyer we know," he said firmly. "I'm taking this case myself." The wheels of justice had just started turning, and Morgan Freeman was now leading the charge. But little did anyone know, something much deeper about Mr. Harold's past was about to be revealed. Something even Morgan didn't expect. Mr. Harold slowly opened his eyes in the hospital room. The lights were soft and a nurse gently checked his pulse. His head was bandaged, and there were bruises on his face. But he was alive. Beside him sat Maya, the young protester who had helped him at the scene. She looked up quickly when she saw him move. "You're awake," she said softly. Mr. Harold gave her a weak smile. "Still here, it seems." Maya nodded, tears in her eyes. "You scared us." "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I just didn't want to move too fast. My legs don't work like they used to." Just then the door opened. In walked Morgan Freeman. Mr. Harold turned his head slowly and smiled again. "Well, look who decided to visit an old man." Morgan walked to the bed and took Harold's hand. "Old man, you're a legend." "Harold, I owe everything to you." Harold shook his head. "You owe me nothing. You found your own way. I just gave you a little push." Maya looked between them, confused. "Wait, you two really know each other?" Morgan sat down. "More than just know. He was my favorite teacher when I was a kid. The first man who believed in me." Harold looked away. "You had something special. I just helped you see it." Morgan took a deep breath. "Harold, I have to tell you something. That officer has been suspended, and I've hired a legal team to make sure justice is done." Harold's face went serious. "Morgan, I'm tired. I didn't come to that protest to make noise. I just wanted to stand for something, quietly. Morgan leaned in. And you did. But this isn't just about you anymore. It's about all the people who get pushed around and ignored. Harold was silent for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I've never told anyone, not even you." Morgan and Maya both looked at him. Harold's eyes grew distant. Years ago, when I was just starting as a teacher, I was fired. Morgan blinked. What? Why? Because I tried to stop a school from kicking out a young black student for something he didn't do. I stood up for him. I refused to lie. They told me I was too bold. I lost my job, but I never stopped teaching. Maya's eyes widened. So you've been fighting for justice your whole life? Harold smiled. I just wanted kids to feel seen, like they mattered. Morgan looked at him with deep respect. You're a hero, Harold. People need to hear your story. Harold sighed. If it can help others, then maybe it's worth telling. Just then the nurse returned. Sorry. Visiting hours are almost over. Morgan stood up and placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. Rest up. Tomorrow I want the world to know the real you. As Morgan and Maya left the room, the hallway was filled with reporters and photographers. News of the incident had already gone viral. Social media was flooded with the video of the officer shoving Harold and of Morgan Freeman stepping in. One headline read, Morgan Freeman defends former teacher after brutal police push. Another said, Who is Mr. Harold? The hidden hero. Behind Hollywood's most respected voice. Morgan looked at the flashing cameras. For a moment, he thought of turning away. But then he remembered Harold's words. If it can help others, maybe it's worth telling. He took a deep breath, stepped forward and said, Let's talk about the man who changed my life. But neither Morgan nor the world knew that Harold's past held one more secret, one that could change everything once it was revealed. The next morning, the hospital room was quiet again. Mr. Harold sat up in bed, his head still aching, but his mind alert. He had not slept much. Memories from his past kept him awake, memories he had buried deep for many years. There was a soft knock on the door. Come in, Harold said. Maya stepped inside with a small smile. I brought you breakfast. She placed a tray on his table, oatmeal, toast, and tea. Harold looked at her kindly. Thank you, dear. That's very thoughtful. Maya sat beside him. You know, since that video went viral, everyone's talking. About you, they're calling you a silent warrior. Harold chuckled softly. A warrior? I've never even held a sword. You don't need one, she replied. Your strength is in your heart. He paused, staring at his tea. Maya, there's something I never told anyone. Not even Morgan. She looked at him, curious. When I was a young man, before I became a teacher, I had a family. Maya leaned closer. A family? Harold nodded slowly. A wife, a baby boy. But something terrible happened. One night I came home from work, and they were gone. The house was empty. She left me without a word. Maya gasped. Why? Harold's voice shook. Her parents didn't approve of me. They thought I wasn't good enough. I never saw my son again. I tried to find them, but I had no money, no power. I didn't know where to start. Tears welled in Maya's eyes. That's heartbreaking. I always hoped, maybe one day, he'd come looking for me. But it's been over 50 years. Then the door opened again. Morgan Freeman stepped in, holding a small file in his hands. His face looked serious. Harold, I think I found something, Morgan said. Harold looked surprised. Found what? I asked my team to look into your past. I had to know more, and they found something strange in the records. He handed Harold the file. There's a man named Joseph Walker. He was adopted in another state when he was 2. The birth certificate had the mother's name, but the father's name was missing. Harold's hands shook as he opened the file. The mother's name was clear, Clara May Walker. Harold's breath caught. That was her name, Clara. Morgan nodded. Joseph Walker is now a judge. A good man, respected. He even helped write laws to protect senior citizens and stop police violence. Maya gasped. You mean Harold's son is now a judge? Morgan looked at Harold. It's possible. He's here. In this city, right now. Harold sat frozen, the file still open in his lap. After all these years. I can arrange a meeting, Morgan said softly, only if you want it. Harold looked down, tears forming in his eyes. I want nothing more. Outside the hospital, the world waited. Protesters had gathered again, not in anger but in support. They carried signs that read, "Justice for Harold. Our elders deserve respect." Thank you, Morgan. Inside, Harold felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Was this really happening? Could he finally meet the son he had lost 5 decades ago? Morgan placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore, old friend, Harold whispered. I never thought I'd get this moment. But now that it's here, I'm scared. Maya smiled gently. Sometimes the best stories begin with fear. Harold smiled back. Then maybe this is the start of mine. But none of them knew what would happen when Judge Joseph Walker finally walked. Through that door, the hospital room was silent. Harold sat on the edge of his bed, hands shaking slightly. Maya stood beside him, gently resting a hand on his shoulder. Morgan Freeman paced near the window, looking out at the crowd gathered outside, waiting for updates. Then came a soft knock on the door. Everyone froze. Morgan stepped toward the door and opened it slowly. A tall man in his mid-50s walked in. He wore a dark suit and glasses. His face was calm but serious. He looked strong, like someone used to making tough decisions. This was Judge Joseph Walker. His eyes met Harold's. For a moment, no one spoke. Joseph looked at the older man in the hospital bed and said quietly, Mr. Harold, my name is Joseph Walker. I think we might be connected. Harold nodded slowly, voice cracking. Clara was your mother? Yes, Joseph said, his voice softer now. She passed away 10 years ago. I never knew my father. She never talked about him. All I had was a name, Harold, and a story I wasn't allowed to ask about. Harold's eyes filled with tears. I looked for you, but I was poor. I didn't even know where to start. I was just a school teacher with broken dreams. Joseph walked slowly closer. You were there that day, the video, the way you stood in peace, the way you didn't fight back but made the world notice. That was something my mother used to talk about. She said my father was calm, gentle, brave. She said I had his heart. Harold couldn't hold back anymore. He covered his face and cried, I thought I lost you forever. Joseph sat on the edge of the bed and gently took his father's hand. You didn't lose me. You helped shape me, even from far away. Maybe that's why I became a judge, why I fight for people like you. Maya stepped back, wiping her eyes. Even Morgan Freeman stood still, deeply moved. For a long moment, father and son just sat together, hands held tight, the silence saying more than any words. Then Harold looked up. You have a family, Joseph smiled. Yes, a wife, 2 kids, one of them, my daughter, wants to be a teacher. Just like you. Harold laughed softly. That makes me proud. Joseph looked around the room. The whole country is watching. You know, they see your strength, they want justice. Harold's smile faded slightly. I don't want revenge, I want change. Joseph nodded. Then let's make it happen together, Morgan finally spoke. I think this story is just beginning. Just then, Maya's phone buzzed. She looked down, surprised. It's the mayor's office. They want to talk to Mr. Harold. And there's a petition, hundreds of thousands of signatures demanding police reform, all because of what happened here. Outside the hospital, the crowd had grown even larger. People held signs that read, From silence comes strength. Harold's law now, fathers never give up. As Joseph stood, he turned to his father and said, Would you like to come with me to City Hall? You should be there when the conversation begins. Harold looked tired, but he nodded. Yes, if my voice can help others, I want to use it. Morgan clapped a hand on Harold's back. Let's do it, for justice, for family. The security guard opened the hospital door, and the group slowly made their way out. Harold in a wheelchair, Joseph beside him, Morgan and Maya following. Outside, People erupted in applause as the doors opened. Cameras flashed, reporters called out. But Harold kept his eyes on the sunrise in the distance. It was a new day, and for the first time in decades, Harold wasn't alone. He had his voice. He had his son, and the world was finally listening. The streets outside City Hall were packed. People held up signs. Some waved flags. News vans lined the roads. Everyone was waiting. The world had watched the video. The world had seen what happened to Mr. Harold. Now the world waited to hear what he had to say. Inside the building, Mr. Harold sat in a large chair on a small stage. His son, Judge Joseph Walker, stood beside him. Morgan Freeman and Maya sat in the front row, their eyes filled with pride and hope. The mayor stepped up first. He spoke about change, about justice, about how the city would do better. But no one clapped. Everyone was waiting for someone else. Then the mayor turned to Harold. "Sir, would you like to speak?" Harold took a deep breath. He stood slowly, his cane shaking in his hand, but his voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I am not a politician. I am not a celebrity. I am just an old man, a teacher, a father, a citizen." The room went quiet. "I came to a peaceful protest because I believed in something simple, respect. I carried a sign, not a weapon. I stood still, not to fight but to be seen." He paused, looking at the crowd. His voice lowered but became stronger. "And for standing still, I was shoved. I hit my head. I could have died." People gasped, softly, some already wiping tears. "But I didn't come here to ask for pity," Harold said. "I came here to ask for change, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt small, ignored, pushed aside." Morgan Freeman nodded slowly, deeply moved. Harold turned to the mayor, his tone respectful but firm. "We do not need more speeches. We need action. We need training for our officers. We need laws that protect the weak. We need kindness to be more powerful than fear." The mayor lowered his head, listening carefully. Harold looked toward Joseph, his son. "And we need to teach our children that doing the right thing might not be easy, but it is always worth it." People in the crowd began to clap softly, then louder, then the entire room stood on their feet, a standing ovation. Harold smiled. It wasn't pride, it was peace. Later that day, something amazing happened. The city council passed a new bill called Harold's Law, a rule that required body cams to be active at all times during protests and demanded better training for handling elderly and disabled people in public situations. National news picked up the story. People across the country spoke about Mr. Harold. Children wrote letters. Teachers told their students about him. His peaceful act had created a storm of positive change. That night, back at his small apartment, Harold sat on his old chair with a blanket over his legs. Joseph was in the kitchen making tea. Maya sat nearby, scrolling through her phone. "Mr. Harold," she said with a smile, "you're trending online again. You're being called the Silent Lion." Harold laughed gently. "I like that." Joseph walked over and handed him a cup. "You taught me something important today, Dad. You didn't raise your voice, but the whole world heard you." Harold looked at his son, his eyes soft with love. "Sometimes we don't need to shout. We just need to stand." Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Morgan Freeman stepped in, holding a small frame in his hands. "I had this made for you," he said. Harold took it. It was a picture of him standing at the protest holding his Respect Matters sign. At the bottom were 4 simple words: "One man, one stand." Harold's eyes watered. "Thank you, Morgan." Morgan nodded. "No, Harold, thank you." As the night grew quiet, the world outside kept moving. But in that small apartment, something bigger had happened. A man who once stood alone now had his family, his voice, and his legacy.